Viva 6. Who were the Athenians and the Spartans, and how have they shaped our world? We often speak about ancient Greece as if it was a single place and with one culture and one set of ideals. However, Athens and Sparta represent dramatically different cultures, both of which have had major impacts on the Western world. Firstly, Sparta, on one side, was a highly organized society devoted to equality and the espiritu de corps. Secondly, on the other side, Athens was an innovative society which developed many of the tools which make modern life possible. And thirdly, together, both societies provided the West with the foundations of our world. So the first point is that Sparta was a highly organized society devoted to equality in the spirit of community. Sparta's culture emerged from the fact that this people, the Spartans, took over the Mycenaeans' lands and made them their slaves. Because of this, there were all these slaves that were a much bigger population than the actual Spartan population itself, so they needed a new political system. Lycurgus was a possibly mythical figure who implemented Sparta's new political system with his constitution. Crane Brinton says that, quote, although Lycurgus may have been a wholly mythical personage, the Spartan constitution reflects the realities of Sparta's history and social system, unquote. Out of his work, he made it so Sparta had 3 distinct social classes. First, 5% of the population were the privileged Spartans and who were also the citizens. The middle class was the Puriogoi, who were the merchants and most of the servants. The lowest class were the Helots, who were farmers and slaves who were tied to the land. The top class of the Spartans never worked. They went to the gym all day and worked out. Lycurgus gave equal land to all the citizens, and one of the first things he changed was the currency, which used to be silver and gold, but he changed it to iron rods called obols. So now the currency is worth very little and was really hard to transport. And this provided little incentive to steal. And because luxuries were forbidden, no one really wanted to invade Sparta. They had no good reason to. Spartans had a very interesting family structure where the community basically raised the children and only the strongest babies were allowed to survive. Spartan children were encouraged to say very little and to reply wittingly, and to take a jest without being offended. This shows in basically the famous Spartan comeback lines. Another big part of life for Spartans was that all the men and boys ate together at the mess hall, and everyone got the same food. One common and famous meal was the Spartans' black broth, and it was made from pork and pig blood. It was pretty gross, but it was good for these athletic people. Anyway, most of the boys weren't given enough food to eat because they were supposed to learn how to scavenge and steal food. This would serve to help them become good warriors. They were also very severely punished if they were caught. And they were also whipped as a kind of ritual in some games. One story goes that a Spartan boy had stolen a young fox, but he was confronted before he could kill it. He hid it under his coat while he was being questioned, and he stood without giving any emotion while the fox was tearing out his guts, and then he fell dead. Nevertheless, this boy was held as a kind of hero in the society because of his strength and perseverance. The second point is that, though very different from Sparta's, the Athenian society had a great impact on modern life through their innovations. Athens' first democracy was under Solon, but their government fell to oligarchy before becoming democracy again under Cleisthenes in 508 BC. The political structure had 3 governing bodies. First, the assembly, which met 40 times a year. Any citizen was allowed to address the assembly, but only if they had good oratory skills. And the assembly decided on issues that affected the city. The second body of government was the council, which was made of 500 representatives from the 10 tribes of Athens. They would set the agenda for the assembly and propose legislation, and a member would serve for 1 year in the council. The courts were made up of a large number of citizens who would determine the verdicts in the court cases. For serious cases, the jury number could be as many as 1,501 members who would be paid for their services. Unlike the Spartans, who were governed by a very small class of people, in Athens, virtually every citizen had a voice. But you must remember that only land-owning men could be citizens, whereas in Sparta, women would often own land and could be in a position of power. Demosthenes, a great Athenian statesman and orator, says that freedom of speech had a very long history in Athens, despite the many times it was attempted to be eradicated. Back in the 16th century BC, after the Athenian island of Salamis had revolted, and the Athenian government had decided to try and not fight to win it back, they had forbidden any propositions of war. Solon, who was not happy with this, wrote a poem on the subject, because that form of speech wasn't forbidden. Anyway, this poem ended up changing people's minds, and the Athenians decided to fight back for the island. By the 4th century BC, discussions of any motions in the assembly were open to male citizens, as the herald asked, quote, "Who wishes to speak?" unquote. Demosthenes even claims that this freedom was allowed to slaves and foreigners. The Athenian life was very different from Spartan life. Athenian babies were often not named immediately because so many died in the first weeks of life. Unfortunately, babies could be killed for basically any excuse or imperfection. But there is still reason to believe that the Greeks did, after all, love their children. In marriage, the woman was given a dowry by their fathers, which they could live on if their husbands left them. Unfortunately, many fathers didn't like the fact that they had to give a dowry to their daughters, so that's why a lot of girl babies would be killed at birth. But marriage ceremonies were very festive, with the guests processing with the bride and groom to their new home, where the bride was escorted to the hearth. This seems to be very different from the Spartan marriages, where the married couple did not even live together for the first few years of their marriage. The third point is that many aspects of ancient Greek societies laid the foundations for the modern world. The founding fathers in America were inspired by their democracy, whereas Parmenides says, quote, "Each office of the government had defined in separate rules in a rudimentary practice of separations of power," unquote. So basically the founding fathers saw this system where there were 3 branches of government and decided that it would be a good idea to implement in America. Ancient Greek culture had a great impact on sports. Obviously, for instance, they gave us the Olympics. They impacted art, both and not limited to the theater and architecture. This can be seen as during the Renaissance, there was a great popularity of the Greek styles of art and architecture. One specific way that Sparta impacted the world, interestingly enough, was through the British public school system. The British took the Spartan morals and methods to heart during the administration of the British Empire. They installed Spartan-like leadership in their young men by sending them off to boarding school from a very young age and throughout the majority of their teenage years, where they would not really see their families all that much except for holidays. So it was a very hard and challenging environment, and it was commonly filled with much physical activity. But this brought a generation of men capable of enduring much suffering, and who were able to control this great empire. In conclusion, the Athenian and Spartan societies, although fundamentally different cultures, both had a great impact on the development of the modern world. First, Sparta, a highly organized society, was devoted to equality and unity. Secondly, Athens, an innovative society, developed many aspects of modern life. And thirdly, both Athens and Sparta provided the West with the foundations of our world. Thank you.